I think I'm a pretty strange kind of feminist because I do believe in the fundamental equality of all human beings, and I think the idea of being prejudiced and discriminating against people based on their sex is immoral and out of touch with the reality of what it means to exist and what it means to be a human being. However, I think the concept of patriarchy is highly disputable in Western societies as they stand. And I think there's a kind of illicit objectification of subjective experiences of powerlessness that underpins it. Essentially, many women have experiences of powerlessness in relation to men and the system, and they externalize those experiences as if there is a real thing that is patriarchy. But in this process, they essentially ignore the subjective experiences that men have of powerlessness in relation to women and their gender roles and society itself. And it seems that powerlessness and what it means to feel empowered is quite a subjective thing, and is actually quite difficult to measure objectively. So like for example, two people might give up the same thing and that would appear to be equal, but if one person values that more than the other, obviously the sacrifice isn't really equal in reality in any meaningful way. And I feel often that the attempts to objectify equality and power dynamics are often quite disingenuous as a kind of flip-flopping between the subjective and the objective to defend, a prejudice about who has privilege and who does not have privilege. Yeah, what else was I going to say? There's one other thing I wanted to say, now it's gone. Shit. Am I going to have to start this video again? Yeah, probably. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it just seems so difficult also to actually defend the idea of patriarchy using empirical evidence without seriously cherry picking which privileges we're talking about. And this is something that, the opponents of feminism, of which I don't consider myself to be one, have spoken about a lot, and we end up with this inevitable victimhood Olympics where women talk about the pay gap, men talk about how male criminals are treated, how divorce courts work, and it seems like if you make a list of all of the ways in which women are disadvantaged systematically and men are disadvantaged systematically, it's actually is quite difficult to say who's worse off, especially because evaluating each individual disadvantage is not something you really can do objectively. So let's say the pay gap is true, and I know that's a disputed claim, but I think there is a fair bit of evidence to support the idea of a pay gap. But then let's look at sentencing practices and how if men commit crimes they're more likely to be given custodial sentences that are longer. How actually do we say which is more weighty, which is the most important disadvantage? And it seems like that's a pretty difficult thing to do. It's pretty subjective. And I was raised to be a feminist. I was educated in Oxfordshire's academic circles. In this posh school, my teachers were all Oxbridge graduates. In a time where feminism was a kind of undisputed norm in academic circles. And I feel like I was kind of spoon-fed this narrative around patriarchy and feminism and the justifications for it that upon investigation as an adult just seems so one-sided. And this is true in the media as well. It's every year you're going to read at least one news story about the pay gap and ways in which feminists in which women are disadvantaged. But you never really read anything talking about like the treatment of male criminals and the disadvantages men face, the homelessness, the addiction, and this kind of things, the things that imply that males don't actually have it easy. I mean, look at the statistics on educational attainment, and it seems pretty clear that using the kind of feminist way of justifying the concept of patriarchy, the exact same kind of statistical analytic procedures, this shows women are not doing as well as men. Obviously there's a systematic cause. It's kind of like the standard feminist way of interpreting these things. The concept of patriarchy becomes highly disputable. So there it is. I am a feminist who does not really believe that patriarchy exists in Britain and Western Europe and probably the United States as well. But I think it is worth making clear that when you look at countries like fucking Afghanistan and like super religious African countries and this kind of thing, it's pretty obviously patriarchal in a lot of ways. Although, yeah, I mean, maybe if I were to investigate it further, I'd find that the men have equally shitty lives in their own different ways in those countries. I don't know. But yeah, yay feminism, but probably patriarchy is not such a valid concept as people like to pretend that it is.